My name is Sarah, and I'm about to tell you how my life turned into a series of trials that I never expected. I'm in my early 30s now, and when I look back, it feels like I've lived several lifetimes in just a few years. Everything seemed fine when Daniel, my husband, and I were living in Austin, Texas. We had a cozy little home and our 3-year-old son, Jack, who brought so much joy into our lives. Daniel was a financial analyst, and his job often required him to travel. I was used to managing things on my own when he was away, but I never imagined how much more complicated life would become. The first big change came when Daniel's mother, Margaret, moved in with us. Margaret was 65 and had just lost her husband, Daniel's father. Her health wasn't great either. She had arthritis and struggled to live alone. When we offered to have her move in with us, it seemed like the right thing to do. I knew it would be a bit challenging, but I thought we could handle it. At first, things seemed to work out. Margaret was somewhat helpful, and we tried to make her feel at home. But it wasn't long before the situation started to deteriorate. Margaret's behavior changed drastically. What began as small annoyances soon became unbearable. She started leaving dirty dishes in the sink, claiming she'd clean them up later. But later never came. I'd remind her, and she'd apologize, but it was always the same cycle. The mess piled up, and I was left to deal with it. Margaret also began to play mind games. She'd offer to run errands or help with tasks and then conveniently forget or decide she didn't feel like it. It was frustrating, especially when Daniel was out of town. I felt like I was constantly cleaning up after her and trying to manage the household without any help. Every time Daniel was away, Margaret seemed to get worse. It was almost as if she was deliberately making things harder for me. One evening, everything came to a head. A storm was brewing, and the sky was darkening with heavy clouds. I was busy getting Jack ready for bed when Margaret came into the kitchen, where I was trying to tidy up. She started making complaints about the way I'd arranged things, and I tried to keep calm, telling her that I was just finishing up. But Margaret was insistent and rude, and I could feel my patience wearing thin. As the storm raged outside, I tried to ignore Margaret's complaints. But then, things took a turn. Margaret, in a fit of frustration, locked the door and refused to let us back inside. Jack and I were left outside, drenched by the rain. I knocked on the door, pleading with her to let us in, but she just ignored us. It was terrifying, standing there with my little boy, knowing that we had no place to go. Eventually, a neighbor saw us and offered to help. We went to a nearby park, seeking shelter until the storm subsided. I was frantic, holding Jack close, trying to stay calm. When the rain finally let up, the police arrived, having been called by the concerned neighbor. They took us to the local station, where I met with Uncle John, Daniel's uncle. He had been contacted by Daniel, who was worried about the situation with Margaret. Uncle John was a retired lawyer, someone I'd always admired for his wisdom and kindness. He listened patiently as I explained what had happened. He told me that Daniel had been concerned about Margaret's behavior, and that's why he reached out for help. Hearing that Daniel had noticed the problems was a small comfort, but it didn't change the fact that we were in a mess. At the station, Margaret was defensive and dismissive. When Uncle John suggested that I seek legal advice, I felt overwhelmed. I didn't know what to do next. I didn't want to cause trouble or make things worse, but it was clear that something had to change. I was exhausted and heartbroken, not just from the night's events but from the months of escalating tension. The thought of having to deal with this situation alone while Daniel was away was almost too much to bear. This night was just the beginning of what would become a long and difficult journey. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing within our family, and I had no idea what the future held. But one thing was clear: I had to find a way to navigate this chaos and protect my family, even if it meant making hard choices and seeking help I never thought I'd need. After that stormy night, things didn't get any easier. The days that followed were a blur of stress and uncertainty. Uncle John, who had been so kind to help us, gave me a piece of advice I wasn't sure I wanted to hear. I needed to consider legal action to address Margaret's behavior. I felt torn. On one hand, I knew things couldn't continue as they were. On the other hand, taking legal steps against Daniel's mother felt like a betrayal. Back in Austin, The atmosphere in the house was tense. Margaret's attitude remained as difficult as ever. She acted as though nothing had happened, but her passive-aggressive behavior was undeniable. The dirty dishes piled up, and every day seemed to bring new issues. Sometimes it felt like I was living with a ticking time bomb. Her mood swings were unpredictable, and I was constantly on edge, trying to manage everything and keep Jack shielded from the growing conflict. Daniel, who was stationed in New York at the time, called regularly to check in. I would fill him in on the daily struggles, but his calls always seemed to end in frustration. He wanted to fix things, but was stuck in a different city, unable to do much beyond offer moral support. I could tell he was feeling the strain, and it was clear that his job was creating a chasm between us. One evening, while Daniel was still away, Margaret pushed me to the brink. She made a mess in the kitchen, and then sat in the living room, watching TV loudly, completely indifferent to the noise. I had Jack trying to sleep in the next room, and the noise made it impossible for him to settle down. I asked Margaret to lower the volume, and she responded with a curt, "I'm watching my program." It was clear she wasn't going to cooperate. I tried to stay calm and waited until Jack was asleep before confronting her. I told Margaret that her behavior was making things very difficult for me and asked if she could be a bit more considerate. Instead of acknowledging my concerns, she became defensive and accused me of being ungrateful. It was as though she was intentionally trying to create conflict. That's when I realized that Margaret wasn't just difficult. She was deliberately antagonistic. The realization hit me hard. I had been hoping that things would improve, but they seemed to be getting worse. I decided it was time to take Uncle John's advice seriously. I began looking into legal options, consulting with a lawyer to understand what could be done. The lawyer explained that we could seek a restraining order or consider placing Margaret in a care facility if her behavior became untenable. The idea of a care facility seemed extreme, but the more I thought about it, the more it became apparent that we needed to explore all possible solutions. Meanwhile, I kept in touch with Daniel, trying to keep him informed without overloading him. I knew he was under a lot of pressure at work, and I didn't want to add to his stress. Still, I could see how deeply he cared about what was happening at home. One night, he broke down during a call, admitting that he felt helpless. It was hard to hear him like that, knowing I was dealing with so much on my own. To make matters worse, Margaret started making comments about Daniel's job, accusing him of abandoning her. She knew that he had to travel for work, but she used it as a weapon to make me feel guilty. It was an ugly tactic, and it wore me down. Each day felt like a new battle, and I was growing more exhausted and isolated. The turning point came when Daniel decided to return to Austin for a few days to address the situation. He wanted to see things for himself and help in any way he could. I was hopeful that his presence would bring some relief, but I was also anxious about how it would play out. When Daniel arrived, the tension in the house was palpable. I showed him the mounting problems with Margaret, from the unwashed dishes to the passive-aggressive comments. Daniel listened, but Margaret was in denial. She insisted that she was being treated unfairly and that I was exaggerating the issues. To provide Daniel with a clearer picture, I decided to record one of Margaret's outbursts. I knew it was a risky move, but I needed evidence of the verbal abuse that had become a regular occurrence. I hoped that hearing it for himself would help Daniel understand the gravity of the situation. The night before Daniel was set to leave, we had another intense argument. Margaret was in rare form, her words sharp and unrelenting. I captured it all on my phone. The recording was painful to listen to, but it was necessary to show Daniel the truth. The next morning, Daniel listened to the recording. His face was a mix of shock and sorrow as he heard Margaret's harsh words. It was clear that he was struggling to come to terms with the reality of the situation. I watched as he grappled with the decision that lay ahead. As the days passed, it became increasingly apparent that something had to be done. The storm I'd been through was not just about the weather. It was a symbol of the chaos and turmoil in our lives. And as much as I hoped for things to get better on their own, I knew that we needed to take decisive action to reclaim our lives and our home. With Daniel back in Austin and fully aware of the situation, things started to shift. The recording I had made was a turning point. It was difficult for Daniel to hear his mother's verbal abuse, but it was also necessary. He needed to understand the depth of Margaret's hostility to make informed decisions about her future. After listening to the recording, Daniel and I sat down to discuss our options. It was a heavy conversation, filled with a mix of sadness and frustration. We both knew that our family's future depended on the decisions we made in the coming days. I had no idea it was this bad, Daniel admitted, his voice tinged with regret. I should have been more involved. I just thought, I don't know, maybe things would get better on their own. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anger. I understand. It's been really hard to handle everything on my own, but now that you're here, we need to figure out what to do next. We talked through our options. The idea of placing Margaret in a care facility was one we had been trying to avoid, but it was becoming clear that it might be the only solution. Her behavior had become so unpredictable and aggressive that it was no longer safe or sustainable for us to continue living together. We decided to consult with a care facility in the area. I reached out to a few places, gathering information about their services and the types of care they offered. It was a daunting process, and I felt overwhelmed by the thought of making such a significant decision. Each facility visit felt like another step toward an uncertain future, but we had to keep moving forward. During this time, Margaret continued her defiant behavior. She was aware of our discussions and became even more combative. She accused us of plotting against her and tried to manipulate Daniel by playing the victim. It was emotionally draining to deal with her constant accusations and threats. One evening, Margaret cornered me in the kitchen. Her eyes were cold and calculating. "You think you can just get rid of me, don't you?" she said sharply. "You and Daniel are trying to push me out of my own son's home." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Margaret, we're trying to find a solution that works for everyone. Your behavior has made it impossible for us to continue living together. We've looked into care facilities because it's become clear that we need help managing this situation." Her face twisted in anger. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you? I'm not some old woman you can just toss aside. I'm your family, too." I walked away, my heart pounding. It was painful to see her like this, but I knew that confronting her only escalated the situation. I needed to focus on what was best for Jack and for our family as a whole. As the days passed, Daniel and I continued to explore care facility options. We finally found one that seemed like a good fit, comfortable, with a staff that appeared compassionate and understanding. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best option we had. We scheduled a visit to discuss Margaret's potential placement and to ensure the facility could meet her needs. Meanwhile, Daniel had to return to New York for work. It was a bittersweet departure. I felt a sense of relief that he would be back in his routine, but also a pang of anxiety about handling Margaret alone during his absence. We had set a date for Margaret's move to the care facility, and I was dreading the confrontation. The day of Margaret's move was one of the most challenging moments in the entire ordeal. She fought us every step of the way. Her resistance was intense, and it was clear she felt betrayed. Her anger was palpable as we packed her belongings and prepared for her departure. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," Margaret shouted as we loaded her things into the car. "You're tearing apart this family. How could you be so cruel?" I struggled to stay calm. "Margaret, this is not about cruelty. It's about finding a solution that ensures everyone's well-being. We can't continue living like this. You need professional help, and this facility will provide that." Daniel tried to reason with her, but Margaret was inconsolable. The emotional toll was immense. I felt a heavy weight on my shoulders as we drove to the facility, knowing that we were making a difficult decision that would affect all of us. When we arrived, the facility staff were kind and supportive. They took Margaret's belongings and assured us that she would be well cared for. As we left, I could see the sadness in Daniel's eyes. We both knew that this was a necessary step, but it didn't make it any easier. Back at home, the silence was almost overwhelming. The house felt emptier, and the sense of relief was mixed with a deep sadness. I knew that we had done the right thing, but it was hard to shake the feeling of guilt and loss. As I looked around our home, I realized that we had reached a turning point. The storm had passed, but the aftermath was still unfolding. We had taken a crucial step in addressing the issues with Margaret, but the road ahead was uncertain. With Daniel back in New York and Margaret settled in the care facility, I was left to navigate this new chapter of our lives, hopeful that we could finally begin to heal and rebuild. The day we finally left Austin for Italy felt surreal. The house was eerily quiet without Margaret's constant presence, and even though the transition was bittersweet, I felt a profound sense of relief. Daniel and I had worked hard to get everything in order before our move, but as we packed the last of our belongings and prepared to say goodbye, I was filled with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Jack, who was only 3 but perceptive enough to sense the change, clung to me a bit more than usual. I reassured him with hugs and gentle words, trying to make this big change feel like a new adventure rather than a daunting shift. Daniel was also excited about the opportunity for a fresh start in Italy, but I knew that both of us were carrying the weight of our recent experiences. The flight to Italy was long, and Jack grew restless, but we managed to keep him entertained with toys and games. As we landed in Rome, I was struck by the city's beauty and the sense of possibility it held. It was a stark contrast to the tension and conflict we'd left behind. Our new home was in a charming small town in Italy, surrounded by rolling hills and picturesque landscapes. The change in scenery was breathtaking and immediately soothing. It was a welcome departure from the stress we had been enduring. As we settled into our new house, I felt a flicker of hope that this new chapter would bring the peace and happiness we had been missing. Daniel's job in Italy kept him busy, but it was a different kind of busy than before. His role allowed him more flexibility, which meant he could spend more time with Jack and me. We explored our new surroundings together, and the fresh start began to heal some of the wounds left by our past. I began to make friends in the community. I joined a local mothers group and found comfort in connecting with other parents who understood the challenges of raising a child in a new country. Their support and friendship helped me adjust to life in Italy, and the positive interactions were a welcome change from the negativity we had experienced before. Despite the distance, I kept in touch with Sarah's Uncle John. He was a rock during the turbulent times in Austin, and I valued his continued support. He frequently checked in, offering encouragement and advice as we navigated our new life. As time went on, I noticed that Jack was flourishing in this new environment. The stress of our past seemed to fade as he adapted to his new surroundings with a joyful spirit. The open spaces, the Italian language classes, and the playgrounds became a part of his daily life, and it was heartwarming to see him so happy. The decision to place Margaret in a care facility was one that I still reflected on often. I hoped that the facility was providing her with the care and support she needed. I tried to put aside my feelings of guilt and focus on the fact that we had made the choice out of necessity, not out of malice. It was a decision made in the interest of everyone's well-being, including Margaret's. Daniel and I began to think about the future with renewed optimism. We had faced so many challenges and had come through them stronger. The move to Italy was not just a change in location, but a chance to rebuild our lives, free from the shadows of our past struggles. One afternoon, as I watched Jack playing in the garden, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The sun shone brightly, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and the distant hum of Italian life. The tranquility of our new home was a balm for our souls. Daniel joined us, and we sat together, enjoying a simple meal on the patio. We talked about our hopes and dreams for the future, and for the first time in a long while, the conversation was filled with excitement rather than conflict. As we embraced this new chapter, I knew that the road ahead would not be without its challenges. But we had learned so much about ourselves and each other. We had set boundaries, made difficult decisions, and found strength in each other. The journey had been tough, but it had led us to a place where we could start anew. In the end, moving to Italy was more than just a change of scenery. It was a chance for a fresh start and a new beginning. The echoes of our past struggles were fading, replaced by the promise of a brighter future. With hope in our hearts and a renewed sense of purpose, we were ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, knowing that we had the strength and resilience to face it together.